He said he was going to put her in the grinder just like he did with Dawn.
An explosive twist in the Tiger King saga and the disappearance of Carol Baskin's husband, Don Lewis. But the show's co-star reveals who he thinks killed the millionaire.
I truly do believe that Carol Baskin is behind the disappearance of her ex-husband.
Then, inside the death of Fort Hood Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen.
I thought he knows something or he did something to my sister.
Coming up next. I became a doctor to help people heal. Now I'm using the same science and medicine to take on true crime. We've been covering this story from the very beginning. Tiger King, the Netflix series that captivated the world with its intense rivalry between big cat owners Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin. From allegations that Carol killed her husband, millionaire Don Lewis, to her attempts to shutter Joe's Oklahoma Zoo, it has been a wild ride. Joe Exotic sits in prison, convicted of plotting to hire a hitman to kill his rival, Carol. And his former zoo has been shut down by animal welfare authorities. And now, could explosive new allegations from the ex-wife of one of Carol's former employees possibly provide answers about what happened to the missing millionaire?
It was an international sensation. Binge-watched in 64 million households, Tiger King created armchair sleuths around the world, all pondering a question that has gone unanswered for 23 years. What happened to millionaire Don Lewis? Flashy Oklahoma Zoo owner Joe Exotic thinks he knows. Over the years, he has repeatedly accused Tampa-based big cat rescue CEO Carol Baskin of killing her husband Don and feeding him to her big cats. Carol, now 59, has consistently denied having any involvement in her husband's 1997 disappearance. But many eyebrows were raised in the wake of Joe's wild accusations. After being convicted of hiring a hitman to kill Carol, Joe Exotic was sentenced to 22 years in prison, and his zoo has been closed down for good. Meanwhile, his arch-enemy Carol is living her best life with a stint on Dancing with the Stars this season. But Don Lewis's daughters have taken action. In one of the first commercial spots to air on the hugely popular primetime show, they offered $100,000 for information about their father's disappearance. And the ad even mentioned Carol by name.
I'm Donna. I'm Don Lewis's oldest daughter. We need to know what happened to our father.
Do you know who did this or if Carol Baskin was involved?
A few weeks ago, a new witness came forward. Trish Farr-Payne has alleged that her abusive ex-husband, Kenny Farr, a former employee of Don and Carol's, was involved in Don's disappearance, and she even insinuated that Carol had something to do with it. Although the Hillsborough, Florida County Sheriff has reopened the case, he maintains that there are no suspects, not even Carol Baskin.
Joining us now is Dr. Our Show senior investigative correspondent Marsky Avacampo. So what are these new allegations? John Lewis's story is so bizarre. What do we think may have happened to him?
Yeah, so now we might have some new information and new insight into this. So the ex-wife of one of Carol's employees is coming forward claiming that she has new details about this. She says that around the time that Don disappeared, her then husband, a man named Kenny Farr, shows up in the middle of the night driving Don's van, and that it's full of Don's guns, and that he says to her, Don is gone. And this was before Don had been publicly reported missing. Then she says something very bizarre happened. A mini fridge with a padlock on it shows up on her front porch and then just vanishes as mysteriously as it showed up. And then this last allegation, which is perhaps the most explosive. She says that sometime later during a fight with her husband, who she says was an abusive man, he threatened her and he said he was going to, quote, put her in the grinder just like he did with Don.
A grinder?
A grinder, which she took to mean the meat grinder.
Sure, just to get rid of the evidence. So why wouldn't she have come forward? All these years, people were looking for Don Lewis, asking what happened to him.
Yeah, that's a great question. She says that initially, because again, she claims her husband was abusive, she was worried about her own safety and the safety of her children. But she says years later, when police came to the house following a domestic dispute, she told them everything, but nothing ever came of it. So we reached out to the sheriff's office to ask about all of these things, and here's what they told us. They said, quote, "At this point, it's still an open and active investigation, and we aren't able to comment. We don't have anything to add following the release of the 48 Hours documentary." 48 Hours is where she made these claims. They also told us that there are no new suspects, and that includes Carol Baskin and Kenny Farr.
So she did come forward eventually. She did tell police.
Yeah.
And that's still not enough to get them to do anything.
Well, police have been investigating, and they say there is not enough evidence at this point to consider them suspects.
Carol obviously has heard these accusations. What's her response been?
Yeah, she's been hearing these accusations for decades now, and she has always vehemently denied having anything to do with Don's disappearance. She has also now come out and said she doesn't think Kenny Farr had anything to do with his disappearance. She has talked about who she does think might be involved. She says that she thinks Don's first wife may be responsible for his disappearance. So she's making her own allegations.
Don's first wife?
Don's
Why
first
would she
wife.
want to kill him?
It's all a labyrinth of personalities.
Oh my God. She's already divorced from him. She got free. So what's the latest on Joe Exotic's flight, his effort to get out of prison?
Yeah, so Joe is currently serving a 22-year sentence for hiring a hitman to kill Carol. He's not scheduled to be released until 2037, but he's trying to get out much earlier. He has asked President Trump for a presidential pardon. He's saying that his life and his health are at risk in prison. He's claiming to have been sexually assaulted in prison.
Oh my.
And he also said that he's suffering from a number of health issues like anemia and immune deficiency. So he's seeking to get out early.
I am curious about the zoo, though. I saw the animals in the documentary like most of America did. What happened to his zoo?
Yeah, so the zoo itself now belongs, surprisingly, to Carol Baskin. Carol won this in a settlement as part of a lawsuit with Joe. So now his beloved zoo is owned by his nemesis.
How tragic.
It is like a Greek tragedy.
And the animals, are they all there too in the zoo?
Yeah, so while the zoo belongs to Carol Baskin, the animals belong to a man named Jeff Lowe. Jeff Lowe is Joe Exotic's former business partner. Right. So the animals have kind of been split up. 39 tigers and 3 black bears are now at a Colorado animal sanctuary. The rest of the animals are with Jeff Lowe, but he can no longer publicly display them because the Department of Agriculture suspended his exhibitor's license. So he says he's working on a private park, and he's going to use that park, among other things, as a set for content creation about Tiger King. So there may be lots more Tiger King content to come.
I don't know, Mark. If this is a work of fiction, no one would publish it.
No one would believe it.
No, it couldn't be true. Thank you so much for the insights. Up next, the man who filmed Joe Exotic at his zoo for almost a year says he thinks he knows who killed Carol's husband. Stick around. We've been talking about the latest updates surrounding the Netflix hit series Tiger King, including the closure of Joe Exotic's former Big Cat Zoo and the grisly new allegations about the fate of his nemesis, Carol Baskin's former husband, Don Lewis. Joining us now from Norway is co-star of the Netflix Tiger King series and television producer Rick Kirkham. Rick, you have a good relationship with Carol Baskin. Who do you think killed her husband, Don Lewis?
You know, Dr. Oz, I've known Carol now since 2014 when I first went to work in the zoo to begin shooting a reality show about Joe Exotic. And we've conversed on and off since, even after the Netflix series. And it took me a while to actually admit to myself what I really believed in as far as Don Lewis's disappearance. I truly do believe that Carol Baskin is behind the disappearance of her ex-husband. I talked to her on many occasions. She's complimented some of the interviews I've done on other TV shows and radio programs in which I have actually said that I believe she's behind his disappearance. You know, the bottom line is it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that a millionaire doesn't just disappear. Obviously, there was foul play involved, and the one person who stood to gain anything out of it was Carol Baskin.
Is Carol not mad at you for accusing her of in some way being involved with the death of her husband?
No, Dr. Oz, that's a strange thing, is that whenever the subject comes up between Carol and I talking, whether it be on Facebook or in an email or whatever, she's so jovial about the fact that nobody knows what happens to him, that she's been accused of murdering him and getting rid of him in the meat grinder. Her attitude when she talks about it gives her away, in my opinion, and I've been an investigative reporter for nearly 35 years.
So you think she's just confident she'll never get caught, so actually it doesn't really matter to her if you think she's guilty or not?
When you've got a meat grinder and you've got animals that can eat meat, no, it doesn't leave much evidence. I think she's pretty assured of the fact that no one will ever discover what really happened.
So for everyone at home, Rick spent nearly a year of his life documenting Joe Exotic and his big cat zoo. This footage was striking. How do you feel knowing that Joe's former zoo has been closed for good?
I'm relieved. Dr. Oz, I'm very happy to know that nightmare of a place is shut down. I was there for nearly a year shooting day and night. I lived in that zoo. I actually lived in a trailer home in the zoo for nearly a year. And it did a lot of psychological damage to me, just from what I saw, what I heard. I went there seeing this outrageous gay redneck cowboy zookeeper, as he called himself, and I instantly saw a reality show on the making. So I agreed to live in the zoo in order to make this show. But after several months of living there, I began to see a lot of things that were just unacceptable. The way Joe acted to the people that worked for him, the way he treated these animals, it's something that I should have put my foot down and left much earlier than a year.
I mean, specifically with the animals, what would happen that was so bothersome to you?
Well, it would begin with the fact that if he didn't have food for the animals, they're often, I saw the tigers go without getting any food for 5-6 days at a time. Oh. And they get very angry when they don't have food. I saw him put down several tigers just with a bullet to the head just because he was angry at the animal for one reason or another. He was supposedly a zoo and a rescue center. And one story I tell people is of this woman who brought an old horse into the zoo one day in a trailer and said, Joe, I can't take care of him. Can you take care of this poor horse and put him out to pasture for me? And Joe said, sure, honey, we'll take care of it. And the minute she drove off the park, he walked right up to the horse and shot it in the head and then chainsawed it up and fed it to the tigers. This was just the kind of guy he was.
Oh, my goodness. Joe Exotic recently submitted a case for why he should be pardoned and released. I mean, from what you just said, I wouldn't buy into it too much, but what do you make of this?
I think it's ridiculous. Trump is too busy with the things going on in America. I don't think he has time to even consider pardoning Joe Exotic. And realistically, nobody belongs in prison more than Joe Exotic, in my opinion. I think 22 years was pretty light, considering he tried to kill Carol, and with all the human and animal rights abuses that I could name for the next 2 hours. He's where he belongs, and that's the irony, is that the one thing Joe Exotic always wanted was to be the most famous man in the world. Well, now he is, but he's not in a place where he's capable of enjoying it.
That's a poetic justice. So, Rick, you obviously thought about this a lot. What do you regret most about the time you spent with Joe Exotic?
Dr. Oz, what I regret the most is that I sold out my own journalistic integrity. I should have, after what I was seeing and experiencing in that zoo after 2 or 3 months, I should have walked away at the very least and given up the reality show idea, or I should have gone to the authorities with some of the abuses that I was seeing. But I was so caught up in being a reality show producer, it was my first opportunity to be one, that I let things slide. So if I regret anything, it's that I gave up my own integrity for that year in the zoo. And ever since then, I've been trying to make up for it by speaking out on animal rights on the behalf of the animals in zoos and circuses around the world.
Well, your honesty is a breath of fresh air. Thank you very much for speaking with us and for educating my audience.
My pleasure.
We'll be right back.